Last Sunday, I was talking with one of you before church. We got on the subject of gardening. I was saying that we've got a couple of tomato plants at home that are doing very well, one full-sized and one cherry tomatoes. To see what would happen, a couple cauliflower plants, which we've discovered are very attractive to slugs, and a half dozen various kinds of peppers. Lots of flowers, of course, and for the first time, sunflowers. I was saying with some pride that my sunflowers were 4 feet tall already. The person I was talking with had sunflower plants that, as of last week, were approaching 10 feet. Wow. A 10-foot plant. Especially amazing when you consider that sunflower seeds are a bit smaller than a lima bean. I was thinking along those lines because of a story that Jesus told, which Greg read a few minutes ago. Jesus talked about sowing and reaping. One of his many parables. He told a very simple story about kinds of land and what happens with seeds which are planted in different kinds of soil. Hard-packed soil, like a path, the seeds get eaten by the birds. Rocky soil, the seeds wither because they can't put down solid roots, and so on. This is a universal story. It appears in Jewish scripture, which you also heard read just a few minutes ago. And actually, Jesus is quoting that story when he told his story. In the Old Testament passage, Isaiah is the speaker. He talks about rain watering the earth, and it does not return to heaven until seeds have been planted and watered and yielded ingredients for bread. To satisfy my curiosity, I researched Muslim scripture. The Quran says, "He brings the living plant from the seed grain and the fruit stone, which is a lifeless and inanimate object." The Quran, chapter 36, verse 36. I don't know it to be true, but I would guess that there's a similar concept in Buddhism. Then, Jesus, as was his teaching method, went on to explain what he meant by the parable. For instance, the seed plant was sown on the rocks. The seed plant that was sown on the rocks is at first received by a person with joy, but since that person has no foundation, no root, the plant quickly withers and dies. Have you ever known anyone who gets all enthusiastic about joining the church, perhaps at a revival evangelical meeting, but then loses his or her enthusiasm and drifts away because there was no foundation? The seed that landed on good soil, Jesus' story, produces crops because the person who heard had a foundation and understands. Okay, enough about agriculture. What does this story from Jesus have to do with our lives today, in the here and now. It seems to me that it's a metaphor for a fundamental principle of our universe. What you do causes certain things to happen. Look around yourself at the world that we are living in. Let me just share a couple examples of the difficulties, problems we face in our society. First and foremost, in my head, gun violence. Some statistics. More than 500 people die every day around the globe by guns. 500 people a day. In 2021, the year that has the most recent full statistics, 48,830 people were shot worldwide. And in the US, 12,280 over the course of a year. Those numbers are so huge that I shake my head in frustration. There are laws in place that would make that situation better. The Gun Control Act, which is a national law, was signed by the President just last year. Among other things, it makes it unlawful for certain categories of person to ship, transport, receive, or possess firearms or ammunition. This includes persons who are convicted in any court of a crime punishable by imprisonment. Any person who is a fugitive from justice. Any person who is a user of or addicted to controlled substances, and so on. It's a good law, I think. It perhaps does not go far enough, but enforcing it more strictly would undoubtedly make things better all around. Another example, climate change. Global climate change is not a future problem. Changes to Earth's climate driven by increased human emissions of heat-trapping greenhouse gases are already having widespread impacts on the environment. You see it in the newspapers and on TV every day. Glaciers and ice sheets are melting, shrinking. River and lake ice is breaking up earlier in the year. Plant and animal geographic ranges are shifting and shrinking, and plants and trees are blooming sooner. The effects that scientists have long predicted would result from global climate change are now occurring, such as sea ice loss, accelerated sea level ice rise, and longer, more intense heat waves. Just think about the last 2 weeks that we've been through. There are things you can do. You can save energy at home. Much of the electricity you use in your home, which comes from coal or oil in all likelihood, can be saved if you practice a few easy things like turning off lights when you leave the room, changing your air conditioning temperature, especially when you're going to bed. Here's one you might not be enthusiastic about. When you're going to the supermarket, walk or take your bike. Remind yourself of the last time you were on the Garden State Parkway at 5 o'clock on a weekday. Talk to your representatives in Congress. I'd like to tell you a story to close. A couple of weeks ago, we went for lunch at the local diner, and there was this nice gentleman, about my age, I would guess, sitting across the aisle at a table. And we exchanged pleasantries, said hello, how are you, what about this weather, yada yada. And we proceeded to place our orders and have our lunch, start with our lunch. And after a little while, he got up and left. When it was time for us to pay the bill and go, the waitress said, "Oh, that's been taken care of." I said, "What?" I said, "Yeah, Mr., and I've already forgotten his name. Mr., what's his name, paid your bill." And we thought, wow, that's something we have to do again for somebody else. It's called paying it forward. And I haven't found anybody yet, but I will. Paying it forward is something that we can do to help alleviate some of the disasters and catastrophes that we're forcing on our world. And that's all I have to say.